I can't find my keys.
I've searched everywhere they could possibly be.
But they still haven't showed up.
And I have something very important to do. Maybe they accidentally got thrown under the bed? Nah. Maybe they're in one of the shorts I wore yesterday? Also no. Alright, what about in a drawer I've never opened since I moved into this apartment?
Still no.
Of course.
Now it's time to go do what I had set out to do.
I'm gonna go take a walk. That was probably the most intense dramatic event that'll happen today, because I decided to live what the majority of Americans would consider to be a pretty average life. Most of my days revolve around the same routine. I'll go on this walk, check to see what I missed on my social medias while I was asleep, spend a few hours working on the most important task for the day, and find time to make food in between all of that until I go to bed. By all accounts, my life is average, but when people hear that word average, they immediately associate it with something negative. There's no doubt that all of us are different, and what makes one person happy and fulfilled might make another person absolutely miserable. But I believe that for the majority of you watching, living a more boring, average life will not only lead to more peace, but it will also help you achieve the success and financial prosperity you're really looking for. Just give me some time here, and I'll prove it to you. One of my favorite pieces of media that often portrays what heroism and success looks like is anime. Most anime I watch have the protagonist be the hero of the story who has to go through a journey of many trials and tribulations to eventually reach a point of growth within their character. And while each of these characters are remarkable in their own right, the ones that I feel the most connected to, that I resonate with the most, are the ones who have the most ordinary lives outside of their training. Take, for example, the character of Naruto. If we observe his life outside of ninja training, he is actually an incredibly incompetent human being. He frequently wakes up late, has low intelligence that is clearly exemplified by his failing of tests, and he doesn't even know how to cook anything but instant ramen. But instead of trying to be the most well-rounded, smart, physically strong, and culinarily literate person in the ninja world, he decides to put all of his focus and attention on just one aspect of his character: his strengths as a ninja. He develops his shadow clone jutsu to a level never seen before, masters the art of shape transformation and creates his own form of the Rasengan, and gets in touch with the demon inside of him that no one else possesses. Despite us finding out later in the series that Naruto is in fact a prodigy, and I don't think that's a spoiler because I'm not actually putting anything on screen, right? He still is, by all accounts, an average person. And this is the first point that I'm trying to make when I tell you that you should try to be average. You should try to be absolutely exceptional at just one or two things by putting almost all of your time and attention developing the skills of those things, and be average at just about everything else. Now, that isn't to say you should completely neglect the other important areas of your life. Having at least a decent amount of knowledge in a wide range of skills can be advantageous. But your inadequacy and averageness with most things you try to do will become nearly irrelevant in terms of your character, success, and influence as a person, so long as you become extraordinary at just one or two things. Former Apple CEO Steve Jobs once said, "Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it, and you can build your own things that other people can use." We tend to view those who have changed the world as having access to this secret sauce since birth that us mere mortals will never be able to taste. But the truth is, just like Steve Jobs said, they are no smarter than you. I've been fortunate enough to meet many of the people whom I've either looked up to for a very long time or have achieved a much higher level of success that I used to think made them untouchable. And I can tell you with certainty that every single one of these people are remarkably unremarkable in their day-to-day lives. Outside of the thing they became really good at, they don't know how to cook or clean, they question their existence, and they get depressed and shit in a toilet just like you. The only reason they currently have more financial freedom and success than you, except for the people who inherited a trust fund or something of the like, is because they did one or two things longer than most people and were more consistent and passionate about those things that they eventually reached a level that most people will never touch. And the ironic thing is that most people will never reach that level because they think they're too average to do so. Despite what negative inclinations you currently have surrounding your averageness, without it, you technically would not have what it takes to be exceptional. So try many things, and out of those things, figure out what interests you that you have a strong natural inclination for. Then, choose to dedicate yourself to that thing for years, stay consistent with it, and eventually, you will become astonishingly average. Something that always irks me that I can instantly tell by the way someone talks or carries themselves is an extremely wealthy person who decides to turn a blind eye to the sufferings of the average. Or worse, one that doesn't even realize that that's what they're doing to begin with. A study was conducted at New York University to see whether social class affected people's appraisal of motivational relevance, which is basically just a really fancy way of saying how important other people are worth attending to. They measured this by giving the participants these Google glasses and having them view street scenes with people in them. And they found that those who identified themselves as higher class individuals, aka wealthy people, paid significantly less attention to all of the people in the images. This means that, in general, the richer you are, the less regard you have for everyday people. And that is kinda scary. Now, why this is the case is left up to different interpretations. Perhaps the rich people are just more socially awkward because they never needed to develop those social skills, or they just didn't like the certain type of people that they saw. But I honestly think that it's simply due to the fact that it's very hard to empathize and care about the general population once you get to a certain level of living. Maybe right now you think you want a ton of fast cars and a big mansion in the hills and to only be hanging around rich people all the time. But do you really want to forget where you came from and simply just seclude yourself from the rest of the world? Personally, I don't think that's how one makes the biggest positive impact with their time here. What I think is much more admirable than trying to become the archetype of the most rich person you can think of is accumulating a lot of wealth due to those one or two skills you've developed over time, but still choosing to live at least a somewhat average life so you can stay grounded in reality and use that money to help others who might need it more. It was the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius who said, "The only wealth which you will keep forever is the wealth you have given away." And Seneca, another extremely rich ancient Roman figure, who said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." So before you start to chase the life of the ultra-wealthy, I would advise you to first ask yourself, why do I want this type of life? And is this the life I truly want in the first place? I find that Stoicism helps me tremendously with being grateful for what I have, even if what I have isn't really considered much. And I love reading book summaries of helpful pieces on Stoicism using today's sponsor, Shortform. If you aren't familiar with Shortform yet, it is a platform that is producing high-quality guides to nonfiction books. They provide key insights for the book that are clearly explained, plus smart commentary and analysis that they write themselves, which adds a little bit more information and insight to the books. And the thing that separates Shortform from all of these other book summary platforms is the fact that you can do exercises while you are reading these summaries. They give you the questions to answer so you can actually apply what you're learning in real time, which hopefully you know by now is the most important thing to retaining and using knowledge. A summary on Stoicism that I've recently read is A Guide to the Good Life by William B. Irvine. And in it, he talks about how Stoics like to tame their desires to actually be grateful for what they want out of life, and they did have an exception to enjoying pleasures and luxuries. But I suggest you actually read that summary to figure out what that is. 3 genres I think you guys would like are philosophy, psychology, and self-improvement. So if you want to get access to Shortform, you can use my unique link, which is the first link in the description, shortform.com/Cole, and that's going to give you a free trial along with a 20% discount on their annual subscription. Alright, now maybe after all of this, you still aren't convinced. Maybe you're so deeply invested in living a life that is completely unrecognizable from average that you'd rather die than live any other way. I would argue that you striving for a life such as that is objectively immoral, and maybe go so far as to say that living a modest, peaceful life is a moral obligation. There was a paper written in 1972 by the moral philosopher Peter Singer titled Famine, Affluence, and Morality that has been dubbed as one of the most controversial ethics papers ever written. And it makes the argument that spending your extra money on luxuries instead of using that to donate to charities is evil. You can see why this paper was considered controversial. He starts by making the distinction between the supererogatory and the obligatory. The supererogatory are those things which we can do but aren't required to do, and the obligatory is, well, our obligations. The best and most relevant example of this is when you are in a checkout line at a supermarket. The obligation you have here is to pay for the food that you put into your cart. That is non-negotiable. But once you do that, many grocery stores, at least in America, will ask you if you'd like to donate something like $1 to a charity organization that helps with famine relief. To the vast majority of us, we consider that donation to be a supererogatory, aka not an obligation. But in this paper, he actually essentially argues that if you have the money to buy a coffee at Starbucks when you could just make it at home, or the money to buy a new car when your current car works just fine, you are in fact morally obligated to give that money to that charity. So here's a simple breakdown of that argument. If it is in our power to prevent something very bad from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of moral significance, then we must morally do it. Hunger, disease, and other sources of suffering, disability, and death are very bad. The luxuries on which we spend money are not of moral significance, and by instead donating that money to relief agencies, we could prevent hunger, disease, and other sources of suffering, disability, and death. Therefore, we must morally donate the money that we spend on luxuries to relief agencies. To defend these statements, he provides this example. Let's say you're walking down the street and you see a child drowning in a pond. I think we can all agree that it would be immoral to simply just keep walking and let the child drown and die, as opposed to jump in and do something about it. If we didn't do anything, we would be considered an evil person. And in doing so, we would not sacrifice anything of moral significance. The worst that would happen is that we would be late to where we were walking to, or our clothes would get dirty and wet. If you agree with what I just said here, then by virtue of that, you must agree with the first premise of his argument. And therefore, just like how you are morally obligated to prevent the death of that drowning child, you are morally obligated to prevent the death of a child through your donation of money. Now, I'm not saying I fully agree with this paper. There are several objections you can make for this claim, such as seeing those two scenarios as not having the same moral significance at all. And Singer makes sure to address these objections more thoroughly in his paper. But what I am saying is you should, at the very least, evaluate your morals and see whether living an extremely above average life where you spend your extra income on tons of luxuries is in alignment with those morals. And you should question whether those morals are truly sound. Overall, I think there can be a lot of disadvantages to living an extraordinary luxurious life, and a lot of advantages to living an average one that we rarely, if ever, take into account. But just like I stated earlier, being average does not mean I'm trying to encourage you to be complacent. What I am encouraging you to do is to use your averageness to do what every other average person did in order to prosper by becoming unbelievably good at one or two things, and to evaluate what type of impact you truly want to make in this life. Thank you to all the patrons who are helping support this channel on Patreon so I can donate more money at the checkout line. If you want to check that out, it is in the description below. And if you want another mind-boggling philosophical thought to rack your brain around, then I suggest checking out this video where I talk about freedom and how much freedom we actually have. Thank you very much for watching till the end. Love you guys. Peace.